Hi, beautiful people. How are ya? I hope you're having a great day. So thank you for your patience in waiting on this video. I hope I do it justice. It's not that complex, but there was a lot to it that I felt, as usual, I may have gone overboard a bit, so bear with me. I hope you enjoy it, though. Several years ago, at least since 2013, researchers explored whether fibromyalgia could be categorized as a primary disorder or a secondary disorder. According to them, each person with fibromyalgia will fall into one of these categories. We know that there are certain predisposing factors for fibromyalgia to develop. An individual may have experienced stressful or traumatic conditions like a car accident, repetitive joint or muscle injuries, certain diseases like rheumatoid arthritis or another autoimmune condition, viral infections, and psychological distress, which would be like childhood trauma, exposure to catastrophic events, low job satisfaction, all kinds of things. But fibro often runs in families. However, little is known about the responsible genes involved in fibromyalgia. I mean, it could be several genes. I mean, some research has determined a certain number of genes they believe to be involved in fibro. We know that there are abnormal peripheral and central pain mechanisms. So all of this is a part of the puzzle of fibromyalgia pain. Do you know what caused your fibromyalgia? As far as trauma is concerned, childhood traumatic events may be linked to fibro, but fibro isn't exclusively related to childhood trauma. And about 88% of those living with fibromyalgia have experienced childhood trauma. Quote, researchers believe that when you're exposed to major stress during your youth, the way your stress response develops can be negatively affected, increasing your vulnerability to stress-related disorders, unquote. And fibro is stress-related, not stress-caused, in my opinion. And by that, I mean a multitude of factors all come into play where stress is involved, and voila, we have fibromyalgia. But as far as symptoms are concerned, fibromyalgia is characterized by chronic, widespread musculoskeletal pain, stiffness, and tenderness, as well as fatigue, sleep problems, depression, anxiety, cognitive dysfunction, headaches, and digestive problems, among many others. This has been referred to as primary fibromyalgia. Fibro can coexist with other inflammatory rheumatic diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus, osteoarthritis, and spondyloarthritis. This is known as secondary fibro. So today I want to talk about the difference between primary and secondary fibromyalgia and what I believe and others believe regarding this subject. So hang in there with me. Here we go. Once upon a time, I had an assistant that was not fun to work with. I ended up letting her go, but at the time, my symptoms were developing while I was working with her. And I had been working my tail off to grow the offsite location of the university I worked at and managed. It was long hours and a lot of stress. But when I hit the goal my boss set for me and we moved into our own building, it was like a boulder had been lifted off of me. However, new stressors were evolving. We had to move quickly into that new building so that classes could be held there the next week. I had already been experiencing pain in my hips, legs, and feet. But that move, during the move, not after, I got the worst stiff neck ever, which I just talked about. I couldn't move my neck in any direction at all. It was not fun. That pain started to move into my shoulders over the next couple of months, and then down my arms and back over the next year. Then it was all over my body. The only areas I don't experience pain are my chest and my upper abdomen. There's a little bit of tenderness, but I wouldn't consider what I experience on my chest and my upper abdomen as pain. Did stress cause my fibromyalgia? I believe it is a part of the puzzle. Not everyone who experiences stress gets fibro, though. There were many events in my lifetime that I believe led up to fibromyalgia, but that event of moving into that new building was when fibro truly began to manifest. Fibromyalgia is a mix of many different processes that can be triggered by many causes. One study found that over 100 common causes of and factors that contribute to fibro and ME/CFS are out there. I fractured my tailbone about 7.5 years before my fibromyalgia diagnosis. What factor did that have in me getting fibromyalgia? And how does that play into whether I have primary or secondary fibromyalgia? I had childhood trauma. I had a difficult marriage the first time around. I went through a divorce, which was horrific for my children, which became horrific for me. And life is just hard sometimes. College was stressful. I have 4 degrees, so I put myself through a lot of stress. It all matters, right? Becomes a perfect storm. Among people with rheumatoid arthritis and autoimmune disorder, 20% have fibromyalgia. So people with RA, rheumatoid arthritis, are more likely to have fibro. But the reverse isn't true. If you have fibro, you're not necessarily a risk factor for RA. It's the same for lupus, also an autoimmune condition. People with fibro aren't more likely to get lupus, but people with lupus are more susceptible to developing fibro pain. So it appears that for those with an autoimmune disease, might also get fibromyalgia. But when it comes to a thyroid disease like hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's disease and fibromyalgia, having one of these diseases may predispose you to another. Researchers have proposed autoimmunity, dysfunction of the hypothalamus, and other possibilities. More than 40% of people with hypothyroidism have fibro, but about 62% of people with Hashimoto's thyroiditis had fibromyalgia. Quote, some research studies suggest that autoimmune thyroid disease may be the cause of fibromyalgia and widespread pain. According to one study, about 40% of those with thyroid autoantibodies also have fibromyalgia or chronic widespread pain. Inflammation and changes in the nervous system may be one of the connections and underlying issues between the problems, unquote. Viral and bacterial infections, including Lyme disease and Epstein-Barr virus, can often lead to fibromyalgia, autoimmune disease, and thyroid dysfunction. EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, can be dormant in your body for years, then get suddenly activated due to stress, illness, or an event. EBV infections can lead to overactivation of your immune system and cause a variety of autoimmune conditions, including Hashimoto's disease. It's known that hormonal issues are involved in fibromyalgia. Low cortisol production in fibro can lead to thyroid issues. PMS and dysmenorrhea are common in women with fibro. And if the thyroid isn't functioning correctly when undertreated thyroid problems are involved, patients will suffer. The body's functions can slow down, leading to less energy and a slow metabolism. Hypothyroidism risk increases as we age and is more prevalent in people over 60. The most common cause of hypothyroidism is Hashimoto's disease, as well as iodine deficiency. Trauma can play a role in developing fibromyalgia, another chronic pain condition, or an autoimmune disorder. A person's immune system gets activated from trauma and can lead to a hyperactive state. But trauma can also increase depression and anxiety, cause tension and pain to increase in our body, and contribute to a variety of symptoms. According to some researchers, an unknown cause of fibro is called idiopathic fibro or primary fibro. This is the most common form of fibro. However, many patients with idiopathic fibro have high levels of anxiety and depression. No inflammatory, metabolic, endocrine, or muscle disease is identified. The following information is from a 1993 research article. Blood screening is often normal in about 57% of fibro patients, with the remainder having minor isolated abnormalities. The most common were a weekly positive ANA test in about 18%, and rheumatoid factor at 14%, or mild elevation of ESR at 10%. 50% had stopped working, and 38% were using aids or appliances. Most patients experienced difficulties, such as 32% described themselves as heavily dependent on others, and 58% described themselves as fully dependent. That really shocked me. So I looked at the ages of the participants, and the mean or average age of the participants was 52, but the range was from 18 to 81. So that fits, but this was 1993 and less was known about fibro, and they didn't have some of the medications and treatment options that we have today, other than amitriptyline. However, I do believe that many of us suffer greatly from fibro. I have my days, and they're hard, and they're really hard to explain to other people because you can't see it. So that makes it hard for other people to look at you instantly and know how you're feeling. And then when you feel better, you might make a trip to Walmart, where somebody might see you and think you're doing just fine. They have no idea. We've found a new normal, haven't we, beautiful people? In secondary fibro, physical injury is most often the trigger, like a neck injury, but chronic inflammation of the spine, as in ankylosing spondylitis, is another potential trigger. Surgery to the spine is a trigger that can cause patients to develop fibro. But people with secondary fibro may also have Lyme disease, hepatitis C, or endometriosis. The phenomenon of coexisting autoimmune or inflammatory rheumatic diseases and fibro is what they're also calling secondary fibro. It's thought that in some cases, it may be an early sign of an autoimmune disease. In a 2023 study, when overlapping conditions such as inflammatory rheumatic diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus, osteoarthritis, or spondyloarthritis are present, they said it's considered secondary fibro. So my thoughts, there's two reasons that we should consider fibro as primary or secondary. Number one is for treatment options. According to researchers, knowing if fibro is primary or secondary can affect treatment options. And that seems obvious, right? If you have lupus, you need treatment for it. So doctors need to search for other conditions because they tend to be overlapping, and make sure that they're treating both conditions. I mean, I feel like if a person wants to tell their doctor that they have secondary fibromyalgia, that's fine. But in the real world, the symptoms are the same for primary or secondary fibromyalgia. Fibro is fibro, and that's my point. It's always been my point. Sure, doctors need to search for those overlapping conditions because they may very well be involved. At the same time, they need to follow the guidelines and diagnostic criteria of fibromyalgia. Quote, a fibromyalgia diagnosis implies understanding of issues such as pain, fatigue, sleep, and cognitive and emotional problems. When fibro is considered only in patients with other musculoskeletal conditions, the benefit of fibro diagnosis is lost. That's a quote from Frederick Wolf and Johannes Rasker. And the second one is for researchers in clinical trials, knowing that fibro is primary ensures those symptoms are not coming from another well-established illness like RA. That's important in research so that the results are accurate and in accordance with basic ethical principles. So that's why in those early days, they started talking about primary and secondary because their research studies were getting messed up because of these overlapping conditions involved in fibromyalgia. So fibromyalgia is not a diagnosis of exclusion. There are clear-cut diagnostic criteria. Like all diagnostic criteria, it isn't perfect. The 2016 criterion has a 95% sensitivity. So about 5% will either not be diagnosed with fibromyalgia when they have it, or they will be diagnosed and they don't have it. But that's still pretty good. When all of the following criteria are met, fibromyalgia can be diagnosed in adults. So now that you've watched this presentation, feel free to pause the video or come back to this point and see how you do. Did your doctor use this to diagnose you? Mine didn't. I didn't know there was even criteria to be used at that time. Even so, I definitely meet the guidelines of fibromyalgia. So a diagnosis of fibromyalgia is valid, irrespective of other diagnoses. A diagnosis of fibromyalgia does not exclude the presence of other clinically important illnesses. So there should not be any other condition or disorder present that adequately explains the areas and extent of the pain that you are suffering with. It doesn't matter if there is another condition. And yet, there are still physicians who misdiagnose fibro when they don't take into consideration all of these criteria. So your diagnosis doesn't depend on whether you have an overlapping condition, because most of us have one, right? A secondary fibro can be different in each of the research studies that we've looked into. So in one, they'll rule out people with an autoimmune condition, but are okay with people who have osteoarthritis, for example. Isn't it possible that after you were diagnosed with fibromyalgia, you got an overlapping condition? So does that mean you have primary, or now you have secondary? For research and for your doctor, yes, this is important. In everyday life, this isn't important. That's why I never bring this up. So the question of the equivalency of primary and secondary fibromyalgia is no longer germane, as most patients with primary fibromyalgia will be found to have comorbidities. Quote, back pain in older individuals when age-related radiographic changes are present might be considered secondary fibromyalgia, whereas the same symptoms in younger individuals might be considered primary fibromyalgia. And that's what I'm talking about. When does it become primary or secondary? In everyday life, it just doesn't matter. In the criteria study, there was no difference between primary and secondary fibro with regard to symptoms and diagnosis. Quote, this division between primary and secondary fibromyalgia is artificial, unquote. And that's from Frederick Wolf. I hope this has helped you to understand why primary and secondary terminology has been used. I rarely hear it nowadays or in research, but it may come up from time to time. I hope you enjoyed this video. I send you gentle hugs and support. Love you. And fibroistress. There were PMS and dysmenorrhea are common. Chiming. But in the real world, the symptoms are the same